All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So we are still on Surah Al-An'am. وَلَوْ جَعَلْنَاهُ مَلَكًا لَجَعَلْنَاهُ رَجُلًا وَلَلَبَسْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ ما يلبسون ولقد استهزئ برسل من قبلك فحاق بالذين سخروا منهم ما كانوا به يستهزئون. We went with Tafseer al-Qurtubi, and in Tafsir al-Qurtubi, we basically had said a couple of things. Let's say, وَلَهُ مَا سَكَنَ فِي اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ. And we talked about sakana, and we mentioned the different interpretations that different mufassirin had. And we mentioned that when al-Qurtubi would say qila, that he's basically quoting, or at least not necessarily quoting per se as taking as a quote, but basically referencing that the different mufassirin or the different scholars of tafsir had basically mentioned the tafsir in 1, 2, 3, 4 different things. So we talked about number one, ma sakana, and basically sakana to mean something that was idle. In other words, speaking about something that is lacking motion. And but then, of course, al-Qurtubi, that's not the favored, I guess, tafsir that he wanted, because he considered that the word ma khalaqa and the meaning the word ma sakana to mean what was created, because he felt that it was more comprehensive than speaking about it from an angle that basically is referring to motion. And we talked about, about this ayah, وَلَهُ مَا سَكَنَ فِي اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ. So whether it was that Allah, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala belongs everything that was created throughout the day and throughout the night and throughout the day, or whether we're speaking about something in motion. Okay. At the end, it was giving us the inference, because remember, those ayat are basically taking us to recognizing a couple things. Let's kind of delete all of this again and just remember really quick and what we were talking about. And remember when we said those fancy names that the scholars of philosophy would say, the theological argument and the cosmological argument and so forth. So, or kalam argument and all of those. So, in the same sense, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was laying out basically that how things are created and whatever results from this creation, and basically all the different things, whether in motion or whether in an idle state, everything basically belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, we talked about that last time, so we're just going to continue. قُلْ أَغَيْرَ اللَّهِ أَتَّخِذُ وَلِيًّا. And say, should I be taking other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a wali? And wali, whether that meant rabban wa ma'buda. Il-wali, we mentioned before, il-wali can be the one that I turn to in worship. Il-wali can be the one that I turn to in decision making, meaning the one that I would turn to in defining my principles when we say decision making. And the wali could also be the one that I would seek refuge from. In other words, I seek support from, rizq, etc. All those different names and attributes. So that's what a wali is. Okay, so when this ayah was basically taking us into, well, now that you recognize that the Lord Almighty, one, to everything that is in the heavens and the earth basically belongs to the Lord Almighty, that is in property, and two, even the functioning of things basically go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is له مقاليد السماوات والأرض. Remember how every single time we speak about the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we speak about the functions. We would go back, remember our blueprint in Surah Ash-Shura. Remember that piece of it? We talked about it in Surah Ash-Shura. I would always go back to it. Whenever I want to talk about Aqidah and the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there are two main ayat that you must go back to. In fact, if you are to speak about Aqidah, ayah number one is basically ayat al-Kursi. Ayat al-Kursi acts as the main foundation of Aqidah. If you wanted to teach ayat al-Kursi and you wanted to teach that those two ayat in Surah Al-Shura, you had basically taught the main foundations of Tawheed in Islam. That's very simple. Okay, let me just take you back to, let's just remember page 138 so we can easily go back to it. And in Surah Al-Shura, I think I mentioned it before to you and I showed it before to you, but it's really important to just kind of take you into that ayah again, because this, you really have to memorize this piece of it. فاطر السماوات والأرض, basically the one that created the heavens and the earth, created the binary system, or at least created the different systems, whether in biology or the different systems. يَذْرَأُكُمْ فِيهِ, he was the one that created you on earth, basically created you to dwell in it. Yet you cannot use this system and apply it on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For the Lord Almighty, nothing is similar to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when we say nothing is similar to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that does not mean you would strip the different potentials, the different powers that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ, and He is the all-hearing and all-seeing. Well, not only is He the one that had created everything, but even the function of it. لَهُ مَقَالِدُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ يَبْسُطُ الرِّزْقَ لِمَن يَشَاءُ وَيَقْدِرُ. Since He is the one that created everything, well, He also controls their function. He would also control their function, that things do not basically just function on their own. In other words, the energy is not put within matter to do things on its own, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that controls matter, is the one that controls the amount, is the one that controls the different, whether we're speaking about potentials, velocity, rizq, whatever, energy, whatever is basically within it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that actually controls everything. إِنَّهُ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ عَلِيمٌ, and He is basically the all-knowing in everything. So when you look at this ayah and also ayat al-Kursi, they would be those two ayat that you would need to see through, that the system in this universe, you cannot apply it on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. At the same time, you cannot strip the different potentials and basically consider that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not like us, therefore He cannot see or cannot hear. But so that's why there's that affirmation right there, وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. So going back to this ayah, basically does the same thing, the same idea. That's why I think it was page 138. Yes, it was. Alhamdulillah. Okay, so same thing with this, basically taking us to لَهُ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. And therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has, one, the ownership of everything, and two, the function of everything. And that's why it did the same thing, just like that one, that وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. This one, وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ. So the same, you could see the same pattern. So why is Sami'? Because we would usually think of idle things as not having sound, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting you know that He is all hearing of the different things that you may not be capable of hearing, you may not be capable of recognizing, but the Lord Almighty, just like in Surah Al-Shura, وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here, وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ, just to let you know that He encompasses basically everything that surrounds you. قُلْ أَغَيْرَ اللَّهِ أَتَّخِذُ وَلِيًّا. By the way, there is actually a very important book. Let me take you, let me see if I can actually, if I can take you to a very important book. No, not this one. Inshallah, I'll find it. I'll find it. One of the most important books in Aqidah. Let me see if I can find it really quick right now. But a very important book in Aqidah that basically is one of those books that I would really recommend in studying Islam or studying Aqidah through, because he did an outstanding job in let me see if I can't find it right now, but inshallah I'll find it for you, and hopefully inshallah something that we will do, or at least continue, because I've been actually working on that book for quite a while. Okay, قُلْ أَغَيْرَ اللَّهِ أَتَّخِذُ وَلِيًّا. and say, should I be taking other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as al-wali? So how did we get there? So قُلْ أَغَيْرَ اللَّهِ أَتَّخِذُ وَلِيًّا, after letting you know the foundations of understanding the basically the existence, the magnificence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then the implication would be, if you recognize that the Lord Almighty is the one that you turn to in considering him as the deity, as the Lord, then you would turn to him in worship. Wait a minute, how did we get there? Let's go back to, I think it was 457, am I right? Okay, no, I'm going to take you back to Surah al-Shura again. Okay, let's go to Surah al-Shura again, because it actually did the same pattern. Okay, it did the same pattern, and it after فاطر السماوات والأرض جعل لكم من أنفسكم أزواجا ومن الأنعام أزواجا يذرأكم فيه ليس كمثله شيء وهو السميع البصير. Let's look at it. Then it takes us into the same pattern. Look at it. شرع لكم من الدين ما وصى به نوحا والذي أوحينا إليك وما وصينا به إبراهيم وموسى وعيسى أن أقيموا الدين ولا تتفرقوا فيه. With the same pattern. What was the pattern? Just like in that ayah in Surah al-An'am. So let's remember 493, and I think the other one was 138. Let's do the comparison. Okay, so after laying out the foundation of letting us understand basically the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the magnificence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it tells you to take Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as al-wali. Then it tells you to take Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, since you recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala encompasses everything, then the implication and the way you should relate with that is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala should be the one that you would turn to in worship. But worship is more comprehensive than ritual, because worship means that you take Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the decision maker, as the one that basically determines the principles. Number 3 or 2, that you would basically turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in seeking refuge. In other words, don't give up your principles in fear of something. So that's why it basically jumped to telling you about fear. Because usually people give up their principles probably in fear of the society, or probably in fear of death, or probably in fear of losing their job, or probably, so always fear is present. So most of the times people would sacrifice their own principles in fear of their life. So that's why this ayah was taking us into those steps. So you recognize the Lord Almighty encompassing everything. The implication would be you would turn to him as the wali, and therefore, definitely, when you turn to your Lord Almighty as the wali decision maker, as the when you seek refuge in, and as the one that defines basically principle for you, etc., well, there's going to be an opposition. It's not going to go like that. It's not going to just pass like that. And that opposition, they're going to use different forms of threat to basically, hey, you're going to lose your employment. You're basically going to lose your chance of improving your CV. You're going to lose your chance of probably paying your mortgage, paying this, and you're going to lose your chance of probably putting your kids in prestigious universities, etc. All of those things will basically be present to making you afraid to hold on to the principle. So you end up living in this battle within yourself. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then, after telling us that, tell them and let them know, but this isn't just talking to them, this is also you talking to yourself. قُلْ أَغَيْرَ اللَّهِ أَتَّخِذُ وَلِيًّا. Tell them, should I take other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as my wali? فَاطِرِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Since he is the creator of the heavens and the earth, and he is وَهُوَ يُطْعِمُ وَلَا يُطْعَمُ, and he's the one that feeds and no one feeds him, taking us where? Taking us to the rizq. قُلْ إِنِّي أُمِرْتُ أَنْ أَكُونَ أَوَّلَ مَنْ أَسْلَمَ. Let's go back to that ayah, 197, is it? Surah al-Shura. There we go. So we got it right there. Let's go back to that one and let's see how it also did that same pattern right there. Let's say this in the same pattern, after telling us Fatir al-Samawati wal-Ard, and then after telling us the function of everything, then it takes us into the same pattern. شرع لكم من الدين ما وصى به نوح والذي أوحينا إليك. So that the Lord Almighty, the word is shara'a. What is shara'a? Where does the word sharia come from? The word shara'a actually means the spring of something. What does a spring look like? Well, remember the spring, when you have a spring, it's basically sweet water. It's basically pure water. Okay, it's not salty water. That's basically that shari'ah right there. That sharia is basically spring water. Okay, so when we're speaking about spring water, we're speaking about sharia as well. Sharia basically means there's a pure foundation, that pure water, it's kind of like a water, and that sharia is basically a certain path. Okay, it's a certain path. So شرع لكم من الدين, this path is basically coming from a certain foundation, a certain deen. It's a certain principle that you have faith in, and it's also a path that you would practice on the outside. And that's why when you look at الشرع, or you look at الشراع, الشراع is basically, you know, when you would have let's say the ships, and then the ships would have these, what are they called? Those basically the wind, the wind,
Sailing.
there you go, the sailing things.
Yeah.
Basically, that's that shira. Okay, so when you look at شرع لكم من الدين ما وصى به نوح, it's like to give you the foundation and how it helps you sail, and what kind of sailing and where is it coming from. Well, it's the same sailing, or the same, let's call it the same foundation that Nuh alayhi salam was founded on. It was basically what Ibrahim alayhi salam was made to make a will to hold on to. Same thing with Musa and Isa. And what is it to do? An aqimuddin, that you would basically an aqimuddin, you would put it into practice, you would implement it in your life. And when you look at an aqimu, what is al-iqama? Al-iqama is to make something stand. Okay, so what? We're making the religion stand? No. You, by taking the religion itself, you're putting yourself to standing. You're making yourself live in confidence, live in strength, live in courage, live in power. So, an aqimuddin, this is also to give you the inspiration that certainly you have to put it into implementation, but the deen itself gives you the power. Deen itself gives you the pride, gives you the power, and then it goes, وَلَا تَتَفَرَّقُوا فِيهِ. It can happen that when we're in pride, when we're in this strong confidence, وَلَا تَتَفَرَّقُوا فِيهِ, can happen that those people that basically belong and adhere to a certain foundation, it can happen that they can get into some kind of a dispute. But وَلَا تَتَفَرَّقُوا فِيهِ, it's not necessarily to tell us that the people themselves are going to get into dispute, because you can dispute whether you're in Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, whatever it is. But this is وَلَا تَتَفَرَّقُوا فِيهِ, meaning do not deter away from the path of the faith. كَبُرَ عَلَى الْمُشْرِكِينَ مَا تَدْعُوهُمْ إِلَيْهِ. Same thing. Just like he had said in Surah Al-An'am, that in Surah Al-An'am, what was it saying? Let's go back to it really quick right there. And where was it? Was it 138? I think it was. Here we go. What was it saying? قُلْ إِنِّي أَخَافُ إِنْ عَصَيْتُ رَبِّي. And I fear if I would basically disobey the Lord Almighty, my Lord Almighty, a torment, a magnificent torment. That's the same thing in Surah 493, was it? Yes, I think it was. Yes, here we go. Same thing. It was basically taking us in the same order. كبر على المشركين ما تدعوهم إليه. That the disbelievers, the mushrikeen, basically the polytheists, that they would see whatever you're calling them for as something that is magnificent, as something that is a peril, as a danger, as a threat. So don't expect that they're going to embrace you or that they're going to want to be inclusive to you. Absolutely not. كبر على المشركين ما تدعوهم إليه. The whole Muslim system, the whole system in Islam is basically to them a threat because it means their banking system, their economical system. It means the system that basically is abusing people's resources, and you're standing out to call for justice. You're calling out for independence for people. Well, that would basically mean the fall of imperialism. That would mean all the different resources that the imperialist countries are stealing from the poor countries is basically right there falling right before their eyes. So the system, whether we're talking about the banking system, the political system that's basically stealing and ripping people of their resources, and certainly the trafficking and the pornography and all the alcohol and all of that, that's basically in Hollywood, and all of that stuff is basically going to fall before their eyes. So to them, they're going to hold on to it because it just basically, to them, it just means you exposing their attempts and what they are using to control people. And remember when we talked about Rabi'i ibn Amir, when I talked about Rabi'i ibn Amir, and I said that Rabi'i ibn Amir, he was that Sahabi that had met Rustum, who was at the time basically the head of the military. So think of him as basically, the head of the military in the Persian Empire. And Rabi ibn Amir, of course, being at the time the deputy, basically on behalf of Umar ibn al-Khattab, what are you fighting for? What are you guys coming in for? Why are you doing all of this? And he said, ابتعثنا الله لنخرج العباد من عبادة العباد إلى عبادة رب العباد. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically sent us to free people from worshiping people to worshiping the Lord of the people. And نخرج العباد من عبادة العباد إلى عبادة رب العباد ومن ضيق الدنيا إلى سعة الآخرة. And from the narrowness of this life to the vastness of the hereafter. Now, I want you to look at this one and put it within this context. كَبُرَ عَلَى الْمُشْرِكِينَ مَا تَدْعُوهُمْ إِلَيْهِ. In other words, you're going to find this opposition. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting you know that you will not be accepted. The second that you're accepted, then you're actually doing something that is not quite right, because you're then just accepted either because you're giving up on your principles, or there's something fishy about what you are saying, and you're probably just bending too much. Okay, if you're bending too much, then that would mean you're not having the Muslim honor. You're supposed to have that honor. Don't bend too much. Don't bend too much. You only bend for your Lord Almighty. Allahu yajtabi ilayhi man yasha wa yahdi ilayhi man yunib. For the Lord Almighty chooses whom He wills and guides whom man yunib. In other words, if you really want guidance, you would have to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's no way. There's no way. If you want guidance, there's no way to find it in any other way but inaba ila Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but by going to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so what are we supposed to be doing here? And why are we actually going back to Surah Ash-Shura? Because it's the same idea with Surah Ash-Shura. Between Surah Ash-Shura and Surah Al-An'am. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes us in the same way. قُلْ أَغَيْرَ اللَّهِ أَتَّخِذُ وَلِيًّا فَاطِرِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَهُوَ يُطْعِمُ وَلَا يُطْعَمُ قُلْ إِنِّي أُمِرْتُ أَنْ أَكُونَ أَوَّلَ مَنْ أَسْلَمَ. That's where we left off at. قُلْ إِنِّي, and say, I was ordered to be amongst the first of those that would become Muslim. But here's the thing. Is it really aslama to mean to become Muslim, or what does it mean? So yes, that is one interpretation. aslama to mean opposing or to mean the opposite of mushrik. That's one interpretation. Okay. The other interpretations, let's look at it. Right here. قل إني, let's look at Tafseer al-Qurtubi and see what he says. قل إني أمرت أن أكون أول من أسلم. I was ordered to be amongst the first ones to become Muslim, to mean أول من أخلص. Just give me a second, please. Okay, so the first interpretation is أول من أسلم to mean one, أستسلم لأمر الله. Wait a minute, so what does it mean أستسلم? So one thing is that when you see in Lugha Arabiya that alif, sin, ta right there, that means to seek something. Usually, not always, but it usually means to seek something. Okay, أستغفر, I'm seeking forgiveness. Astaslim, what does that mean? Am I seeking basically what? Silm, am I seeking peace or am I seeking submission? What does it really mean? Okay, so when we say aslama, the word, this alif right here can mean, if I were to say asbaha, that means to enter in morning. Amsa, to enter in nighttime. Okay, so aslama is also to enter in some form of submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when you say aslam, it is one, that the person is entering in submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or two, entering in something rather a little more specific, which basically means akhlasa, to enter in sincerity. Well, what's the difference between sincerity and submission? So submission, you would basically let your decisions, in other words, your will, basically go in accordance with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered me to, let's say, wear hijab. Okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered me to wear hijab. I would want to go out without hijab and just let the air, I guess, go through my hair and go basically instead of me feeling heated with hijab. But I let my will basically bend and bow down to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will. So I will let go of what will I might want to have to basically go in accordance, and basically I'll adopt and embrace Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will / order, because I am awwala man aslam, because I am amongst those that had embraced al-Islam. That's basically what Islam means. That I'm letting my own will basically submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will, order. I'm letting my will, what I would desire to do, basically not be something that I would practice, because I would take Allah's order as my will. That's Islam. Okay. At the same time, al-ikhlas is more specific. Al-ikhlas, sincerity, is more specific. What is sincerity? Sincerity is looking at the motivation. Why are you doing this? Are you doing this because you believe in it? Or are you doing this because when people see you religious, they might consider taking you seriously because they're looking for someone with integrity? In other words, are we looking at here conflict of interest? Are we talking about sincerity, that my own motive is only for the sake of the Lord Almighty? How do I know if I have sincerity or not? You would know, the scholars had said there's one key. Al-ikhlas istiwa'ul madhi wal-dham. Let me write that down, because this is key. The scholars had said al-ikhlas is istiwa'ul madhi wal-dham. What does that mean? They said whether eulogy or whether praise or whether somebody is putting you down, it's not going to change your action. It's not going to change your motive. It's definitely not going to change your decisions. You're going to stay firm on what you're doing. That's an ikhlas. So whether people mocked you for wearing hijab, thinking that you look outdated, or whether you were praised and people thought that it looked great on you and it just gave you some kind of serene look or whatever it is to you, it doesn't matter. It's not going to change what decisions you had made, because you are basically choosing al-Islam, submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So whether people praised you for your decision in wearing hijab as an example, or whether people mocked you, it doesn't make a difference. Why? Because you've got your ikhlas in place. So when we look at awwala man aslam, whether that is a more comprehensive statement to mean that the person is submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or whether it is more specific to meaning that the person is saying that I'm being sincere to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, okay, then in that situation would basically be within the same idea. Now there is another interpretation that the person is basically protected. Meaning what? And why and how did they get into protection? They said, well, قُلْ إِنِّي أُمِرْتُ أَنْ أَكُونَ أَوَّلَ مَنْ أَسْلَمَ وَلَا تَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ, that the person is basically protected because, of course, they were being targeted, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to protect them, but they're not going to be amongst the mushrikeen. I want you to look at وَلَا تَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ, because it's basically telling you that you have to, and it's part of our own nature, that we need to feel a sense of belonging. We need to feel a sense of belonging, and we take that moment of who do you feel a part of. And that's why you could see, for example, I talked about this last time, many times people would ask about piercing. And I would say that the question about piercing is not necessarily whether it's permissible to look and appear in a certain way. It's not necessarily just a question on, well, can I wear this or not? The question is far more, I would say, serious than just a piercing. And should I pierce my nose? Should I pierce my lips, or should I pierce this? And it's not just some kind of a jewelry you're putting on your body. These people are enduring the pain. And we're speaking about sometimes excruciating pain, whether we're speaking about piercing tongues or probably piercing different sensitive body parts, okay? And enduring all the pain just to get a sense of belonging, that you are part of something. Whether we're speaking about tattooing, we're speaking about piercing, we're speaking about probably, doing a certain, or having some certain appearance on the person's body. It's to feel a part of something. It's a commitment to joining and considering that I'm part of a certain group that is willing to do whatever it takes to be a part of this group. It's a sense of belonging. That's why the Prophet ﷺ, when he talked about, and it's quite interesting, when he talked about لعن الله النامصة والمتنمصة الواشرة والمستوشرة and الواشمة والمستوشمة, when we're talking about the Prophet ﷺ in the hadith, that the Prophet ﷺ had cursed the women that would shape their eyebrows, or the women that would do tattoos, and the women that would basically braid their teeth in a certain way. Tahir ibn Ashur commented on this one, and he's one of these scholars that went deeper than just looking at what type of, I guess, cosmetic practice people and women would do in order to fit in. And he said the reason why these particular things were mentioned was because these practices were the practices that deviant women were practicing in order to basically attract and bring attraction or attention, and they were known for these behaviors. So these behaviors were basically the trend. These behaviors were the trend to show the availability of these women to fit in, and that they're basically women available for hangout, available for chatting, available for any of those. So they would basically have a certain trend. And that trend was to basically appear in a certain way, appear with certain probably eyebrow shapes, or appear with certain maybe braided teeth, or appear with certain tattoos to basically show their availability. And that principle is not necessarily something that they would take always wholeheartedly seriously. And from that, Tahir ibn Ashur comments that it's not exclusive to those particular practices. Tahir ibn Ashur says any trend that is done by deviant groups, it would be haram to practice. So whether we're speaking about a trend to perhaps maybe shape and microblade the eyebrows, or a trend to puff the lips or puff the whatever, and all of those different things, and they're called basically ways of bringing beautification, and ways to probably put those Botox and fillers and all of that, and probably enhancing certain areas, and probably all of those different things, and that's basically one of those signs that these women are basically falling in a certain trend of al-fasiqeen, certain trends of fisq, certain trends of not considering the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And certainly those trends are unfortunately becoming popular even amongst the Muslim women. It's quite sad, really, to see that we rarely would have people asking about the rulings of such ways of so-called beautification. We rarely get questions. Are fillers halal to use? Is facelift halal? Is enhancing certain body parts, is that halal, etc.? Most people would think that it's irrelevant to the religion, but it's actually not irrelevant. It's the core of religion, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to be, one, submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and two, wants you to be considerate over looking at beautifying what is within, and not with focusing on your appearance. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted you to focus on your akhlaq within, on the making of what is within, not the making of the outside. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught us, whenever you would look at, the Prophet ﷺ was teaching us, whenever you would look at the mirror, you would say, Alhamdulillah, Allahumma hassan khuluqi kama hassanta khalqi. Ya Allah, beautify my mannerisms as you had beautified my appearance. What is that supposed to be teaching us? You are beautiful the way you are, but I want you to look at beautifying what is within, and not looking at the outside. Okay, so when we're looking at this, أول من أخلص أي من قومي وأمتي. In other words, to be protected from basically my people and the people that were going to harm this person. ولا تكونن من المشركين, and don't be a part of the disbelievers. In other words, you have to be distinct as a person of principle, as a person of faith to Islam, as a person that basically is living for the hereafter and not for this dunya. قُلْ إِنِّي أَخَافُ إِنْ عَصَيْتُ رَبِّي. And say, I fear if I were to, the word عَصَيْتُ, what is عَصَيْتُ? عَصَيْتُ basically means I disobey. So I fear if I had disobeyed my Lord Almighty. What does that mean? Disobey, to disobey in what? To disobey whether in faith, to disobey in practicing the faith. All of that is isyan. العصيان is usually in the practice of the religion and not in faith. Okay. But in this context, no, it's more comprehensive to basically include both. Well, what's the difference anyways? When we say isyan in general, in other words, to disobey, we're speaking about disobeying in what practices you would implement in life. Okay. That's what isyan would usually refer to. But in this context, this isn't exclusive to the principles that you carry out. In this context, it's basically including faith. I would fear that if I were to disobey, basically to worship other than the Lord Almighty, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hold me accountable. So this would include faith and this would include legislation, at least in this context. But usually it is exclusive to legislation. Okay. But in this context, and why did we say in this context that it's including faith and legislation and not exclusive to legislation? Because you could see within this context, you could see it was basically focusing on one, and akuna awwala man aslam, that I would be amongst the Muslims, I would not be amongst the polytheists, I would basically take Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as my wali, and that is to basically give us the foundation of aqidah. So therefore, قُلْ إِنِّي أَخَافُ إِنْ عَصَيْتَ, I fear that if I were to basically disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in what? In one, considering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the wali. Two, considering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the one to give you all the different rizq. Three, to consider that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically the one that you submit to. And four, that you would disregard your and basically you would denounce that you're part of the disbelievers. Wait a minute. So why? Let's look at these areas. So number one, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I would take him as a wali, to meaning that I would turn to in worship, in word principle, etc. And then this is more exclusive. أَوَّلَ مَنْ أَسْلَمَ, that I'm submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in sincerity, and considering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as basically the one that I would turn to for all my needs. Okay. And وَلَا تَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. I want you to look at this one. And do not be amongst the disbelievers. I want you to look at this one. In Islam, there's always, when you say, for example, La ilaha illallah, there's no God worthy of worship but Allah. In Islam, in Aqidah, it's not enough to say what Allah is, but you also have to denounce what Allah is not. And this is important. Why? Because it's not enough to affirm something, because one way of defining something is by basically recognizing the distinction that basically defines whatever you're talking about. In other words, if I want to define what is white, I would have to say, well, something that is white is not black. I would have to say white is a color, but that if I were to say white is a color, well, so is red, so is pink. But in order for me to be more specific, how white is different from any other color, I'm going to say, well, it's basically the opposite of black. So white would be the opposite of black. Or if I were to, is it always based on opposites? No. There are certain things that have opposites, but there are certain distinctions that don't have opposite. Short, tall, those are opposites. But there are certain things they don't have an opposite. If I were to say, for example, Chinese, what's the opposite of Chinese? There's no opposite to Chinese. It's a kind. Japanese is not opposite to Chinese. It's different, but it's not opposite. Okay. But in Islam, when it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you could see that there's always that emphasis. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would tell you, for example, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ, there's that negation. ليس كمثله شيء. There's nothing like unto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لا تكونن من المشركين. Don't be amongst the polytheists. You could see that there's that negation. It's asking you not to be a part of something. It's asking you not to. So what is that laying out? It's laying out that you recognize your boundaries of what you are a part of and what you are not a part of. That distinction is very common in Islam. لا تكونن من المشركين. لا إله and then illallah, giving you the affirmation. And also letting you recognize that you are not part of something. لا تكونن من المشركين. إني بريء مما تشركون, or I am innocent of what you are doing. In other words, making those fine lines. And certainly that goes in total opposition with what is right now proselytized as the Abrahamic faith, or right now the Ibrahimiyya that UAE is basically calling for, that all religions, at least Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, there's no distinction, we're all one, and etc. And certainly the whole idea of that Abrahamic faith basically comes from the idea that is right now, I would say, proselytized in a lot of the Western literature as universalism. What is universalism? That all religions are really one, and God doesn't exist in himself. He just exists within your heart, and your way of practicing worship and your way of submitting to your God, it's just a different way, but that doesn't make it right or wrong. That's basically universalism. So yeah, Hinduism, we're going to be inclusive. We're Hinduism, we're just going to just consider that that's their way of getting closer to God. There's no right and wrong in universalism. There's one thing that's wrong, is that you considering that there is one right way. So universalism comes from the whole idea of postmodernism. Postmodernism regards that there's no right and wrong except one right and wrong, which is that if you were to say that there's right and wrong and that there's only one right way, which is basically that everything is absurd and there's no truth, but there's one truth, that there's no truth, okay? And basically imposing this on you, okay? And considers that there's the death of the author, there's no truth, and basically emptying words of the meanings that they basically contain. And certainly we could see Rand, for example, that think tank and other think tanks wanted to empty the Quran of what it means, and basically use modern ways of making tafsir and just our own inspiration, basically going out and about and making my own interpretation and so forth. And rather than having the words themselves go back to the Lugha Arabiya, go back to the Arabic language, go back to the hadith, and go back to the interpretation that was done by the scholars, and basically wanted to empty that and say, hey, why do we have to submit? Why do we have to go back to that? Let's be more fluid and just embrace all and make our own interpretation and change the interpretation to suit, quote unquote, the modern way of thinking. And that's universalism right there. And the modern way of thinking basically right now is to basically consider that there's no right and wrong, and that all religions had basically come with the same thing. And God doesn't exist as a being, or God doesn't exist in himself, but he is only a myth that you might have in your heart and the other person might have in her heart, a completely different version of what God is, and therefore we would just consider that he doesn't exist as an entity, but it's just a myth that people would have in their hearts. And certainly in Islam, in order to help you not fall for these delusions, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was letting us know that, hey, you make sure you don't fall in this, and make sure you recognize that the Lord Almighty is the creator of the heavens and the earth, and that no, he does exist in and his own entity, and the Lord Almighty is basically the one that gives you whether the rizq, whether life or death, or whether gives you the necessary nutrients or the necessary let's say means to make you survive, all of that in order for you to recognize that you have to be amongst those that would submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and do not be amongst the polytheists. In other words, whether a person basically said that that God is Jesus, or whether the person said that that the world was basically created in absurdity, and that we would just connect with the universe in some kind of a yoga or whatever it is in order to gain some kind of serenity, etc. That's basically amongst the mushrikeen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting you know that your faith as Islam is distinct from other faiths. Make sure you don't confuse those areas. Basically, when it says وَلَا تَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ, don't confuse your practice, don't confuse your faiths. It's completely distinct. So therefore, قُلْ إِنِّي أَخَافُ أَنْ عَصَيْتُ رَبِّي. And we had mentioned before that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not give us the details of what kind of threat they were basically bringing forth. Okay. And why so? And it didn't go in details of what mockery they were doing. It didn't go in details and in telling us what they were threatening basically the Muslims or the prophets with. Why? It was basically letting us know that it's not worthy of mention. As much as they might make you think that it's something to fear, it's not worthy of mention. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't even mention it, but mentions one thing. قُلْ إِنِّي أَخَافُ إِنْ عَصَيْتُ رَبِّي. Just live the wording. I fear if I were to disobey the Lord Almighty, a day that would have magnificent torments. That's all you need to worry about. All that they had threatened was not of something worthy of mention. مَن يُصْرَفْ عَنْهُ يَوْمَئِذٍ فَقَدْ رَحِمَهُ. مَن يُصْرَفْ عَنْهُ, whoever. What is your word صَرَفَ? صَرَفَ can mean one to dispense. صَرَفَ could also mean to turn away. And sarafa could also mean to put a barrier between something and in other words, to basically protect. Okay, so when you say sarafa anhu, may yusraf anhu, this is basically saying, well, whoever is turned away from him. Why is that a good thing? If we're turned away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, why is that even a good thing? No, yusraf anhu, not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The pronoun here, yusraf anhu, meaning the torments. So whoever is basically turned away from what? What is the pronoun who referring to? Anhu. It's basically turning away from the torments. Whoever is turned away, or whoever is basically taken away from the torments, because that's the nearest now, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically given them mercy. Okay, so that's the first interpretation. The second one, يَوْمَ إِذٍ, they said, well, when you're looking, مَا يُصْرَفْ عَنْهُ يَوْمَ إِذٍ, that on Judgment Day, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so يَوْمَ إِذٍ would basically be on that day, meaning whoever is dismissed on that day. Dismissed from what? Well, dismissed from being held accountable, dismissed from Judgment Day. Then, here we go, semicolon, then that's the person that was basically included in the mercy. وَذَلِكَ هُوَ الْفَوْزُ الْمُبِينُ. And that would be the magnificent and the apparent success, victory. Why? Because at that day, it's a day of accountability. So if that's the day of accountability and this person's like, pass, and you weren't held accountable, that's that time that you would be like, yay, I made it. Ya Rabbi. Let's see another قراءة. من يصرف عنه. من يصرف عنه. It's another قراءة. What's the difference between من يصرف عنه and من يصرف عنه? من يصرف عنه would basically be right there as a passive voice. Okay? And من يصرف عنه, the object is basically known. Whoever basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would take away the accountability, then that's the person that was included in the mercy. So in other words, at the end, the inference is really the same. Whether the subject is known, that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, basically dismissing you, or whether we're speaking about a passive voice telling you that, hey, if you are dismissed, you're going to be included in that rahmah. Okay? And that's basically that passive voice right there. أي من يصرفه الله عنه. Okay, let's see. So ما يصرف عنه, we could say different قراءات. Basically ما يصرف عنه, ما يصرف عنه, just different قراءات. Okay, وذلك الفوز المبين. What is المبين? المبين comes from the root بان. Wait, let's put that down. So it comes from the root بان. Okay, so what is بان? بان, and here's مبين. Okay, and what is that supposed to mean? So bana means to be clear. Okay, to be clear. Let's write that down. To be clear, transparent. Okay, and that's bana. In other words, something that is obvious. Okay, so something that is obvious. So ذلك الفوز. What is الفوز? الفوز comes from the root فاز. Okay, let's look at the word فاز. What is faza? Faza can mean to be successful in something. And faza, or al-mafaz, is basically the desert. The desert, how did they put desert in this? So in Lugha Arabiya, you can use a word that would actually mean the opposite, but that's in hope of something. So when we would say mafaza, we would recognize that this person, they're in this desert and they're going to be basically doomed to never making it. So we would call it, that desert, as mafaza, as a way to give hope that there's a way out. Same thing, if we are to look at a person that was bit by a snake, we would call him Salim. We would call them healthy, even though they were just bit by a snake. In other words, it was probably a venomous snake, and if it's a venomous snake, that's it, you're doomed. Okay, because at the time, they basically did not have the medications or whatever it is to basically stop this venom from attacking the body. They didn't know how to do it. Okay, so they were just living in hope that you're lucky if this is not a venomous snake. So we'll call the person Salim and hopefully he'll make it. Okay, so when you look at ذلك الفوز المبين, this is in order to let us know that we're not speaking about some kind of a delusion in making it, but we're speaking about a transparent and an obvious win. Not in a hopeful win, but in an obvious win. Okay, so that's that area where, why did it say mubin? Why did it say obvious? Because this isn't wishful thinking of probably the person will make it, but this is an obvious and a clear and a win that you cannot mistake. That's why he said, وَذَلِكَ الْفَوْزِ الْمُبِينَ. You cannot mistake that. That's basically the win That is the most magnificent one. وَإِن يَمْسَسْكَ اللَّهُ بِضُرٍّ فَلَا كَاشِفَ لَهُ إِلَّا هُ. The Lord Almighty would have pricked you with harm. And of course, there's this thing in philosophy. It's basically called theodicy. And when we're looking at, well, if God exists, why is there evil? And that's basically a whole argument, okay, that many of the atheists would put forward. If God exists, why are there wars in the world? Why couldn't he just, if God is so merciful, then why is there there's this evil? Why are there people, why is there suffering, etc.? And of course, there are a number of different responses to it. Number one is that the Lord Almighty had created this world in a test. That's the first thing. Meaning what? That this test, since there is a test, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was going to show you the different paths. That's number one. Show you the different paths, and then you would have to choose which path you would want to use. Number two is that nobility. There's no way to know what nobility, and there would be no sense of nobility if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was going to impose nobility on you. There would be no test. And there would be no meaning to nobility if every single time something evil happens, that the divine intervention was going to take place. There would be no meaning to nobility, because we would then expect the divine intervention to basically happen. Number three, there's no absolute evil when we're describing the Lord Almighty. But there is absolute evil to describing the different things around you. Relativism, basically. Okay? So when we're speaking about human behavior, for example, this person raped a 3-year-old girl, killed her, and basically threw her in the forest. Okay? This is absolute evil. But when we're looking at, for example, a 3-year-old child getting cancer and dying of cancer, despite all the dua that we made, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would give cure to this child, but the child still didn't make it. Now, you lack data to know the boundaries of mercy that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had, one, compensated the family for the loss of their child. Number one, that's not them. Number two. Number two is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and what he would be giving to this child, basically in the aftermath of all the suffering that she went through in suffering from cancer, for example, and what happens then. So we lack data. But one thing that we can see throughout the world is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, certainly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, when we're speaking about قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ الْفَلَقِ مِنْ شَرِّ مَا خَلَقَ, from the evils that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created. Okay, so what we would recognize is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not create absolute evil, but some of the things that may happen to you as a result of perhaps the creation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the pattern that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in this universe, some of what might happen to you, you might perceive it as evil. Certainly. Hey, this snake is a venomous snake. It attacked me, and I basically got paralyzed from this venomous snake. Okay. But this venomous snake, well, you got paralyzed from this venomous snake, but then an expert probably in I don't know, biochemistry or whatever it is, managed to make a cure from this venom that probably cured people from cancer, and probably cured 50 people from cancer, probably. Okay. Just, giving you just a hypothesis. Okay. So when we're looking at, did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala create this venom within the snake? Yes, he created the venom, but you happen to basically get bit by the snake And you cannot expect a divine intervention to help you out of this. You have to learn how to avoid the different things in evil, or the different things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in this world. Number 4, when we're speaking about evil, evil is one of the most motivation to making civilization. If there was no evil and it was just pure heavenly in this world, we would have actually not had any civilization, because we would expect a divine intervention every single time somebody gets sick. Yeah, God will take care of it. No need to make, and no need to study, and no need to figure out any medication. God will take care of it. Then we won't be working whatsoever to creating probably sciences and doing anything, because we would expect a divine intervention. Whether we're speaking about making architecture, whether we're speaking about medicine, or whether we're speaking about intervening to nobility, probably going to save people from poverty, or probably saving, etc. Because the whole system that you see in the world around you is founded on one thing, which is that we are being tested. We're being tested. So therefore, do not expect to live heavenly in this life. You pass the test of all the different, let's call it, challenges in this world, whether it's to oppose evil, or whether it's to bring good and bring nobility, etc. You pass this level, that's when you would live in the ultimate happiness and the ultimate good called Jannah. The ultimate good called Jannah. If you are not to pass it, then that would mean you are to dwell in the ultimate evil called hellfire, where there's nothing but pain. Okay, so when you look at وَإِن يَمْسَسْكَ اللَّهُ بِضُرٍّ, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala were to basically touch, so when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not put you in absolute evil or absolute harm, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might sometimes prick you with certain things that you would perceive as evil, but they could actually be something that is nothing but a touch of pain, to sometimes let you recognize that you have to turn away, or probably give you the chance to seek out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, reach out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's al-mas. Al-mas is to touch. Okay, so when you're looking at in يَمْسَسْكَ اللَّهُ بِضُرٍّ, and that's basically to describe one key thing. If you were to look at other ayat, the other ayat were basically giving a human description, well, basically a description for the human psychology. Number 1 is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that human beings are created in ajal. What is ajal? That they're always wanting to expedite things, that they're wanting to rush things. They don't have the patience. They can't wait. Number 2, that human beings, whenever they are pricked with anything evil, they don't want to say that they are guilty and that that was a result of choices that they had made. So they would prefer basically removing the guilt off of themselves and say, well, no, it's not my fault. And they would accuse Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala of being responsible. Accuse Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala of being responsible, whether it's Allah or whether it's people. It's always, and this is extremely important to mention, that when we look at today's psychology, embracing the psychology of Freud, for example, and that everything that you go through, the hardship that you go through, or whatever thing, that it's all about the past. It's basically the package within the past that's affecting your life today. But Islam says, well, no, you don't want to blame the past and everything. Islam tells you, no, you want to look at your faith and what you invest in this life, what choices you would make. whether it's تصنعون, whether it's تكسبون, etc. What you do is basically mainly what has a direct influence on what you're going through, and a direct influence on what you are psychologically feeling. So Islam is basically telling you, no, in order for you to work on your mental health, I don't want you to always look at my childhood went through this. My father was one day abusive. My mother was this. My husband was this, and all of those different things, and just look at the past. Yes, certainly the past does have an influence. That's why definitely we would say that Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was describing his patience, and definitely it did have an impact on Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam when he had lost his sight. And what happened? Well, his anxiety was so strong that he had lost his sight. But he was still saying, فَصَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ وَاللَّهُ الْمُسْتَعَانُ. That's it. He was embracing one key thing. Sabrun Jamil. I'm just going to have beautiful patience. Why beautiful patience? Because the patience, in order for it to be beautiful, it's not enough to say, okay, well, this happened and that's it. No, beautiful patience. You recognize perhaps the abusers in the story of Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam. The abusers were basically his own children. They abused their brother. They threw him in the well, and they made up a lie that he was eaten by some kind of a wild animal. And they basically came to their father and claimed that he basically was just attacked by some wild animal, and then made up a whole story. So Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam realizes who the abusers were and the crime that they had committed. But he just said, فَصَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ. He didn't want to go and attacking them. So he just said, فَصَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ. I'm just going to embrace not looking at the abusers and not continuously just attacking the abusers. I'll just ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give me the ability to embrace the pain by embracing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, instead of looking at the abuser and continuously seeing the abuser as the place of my weakness, to seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as my place of power, redirecting my focus. That Allah's Wallahu al-Musta'an. And that's why I said Wallahu al-Musta'an. In other words, I'm seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as my place of power, even though I recognize the weakness that these people had put me in. But I would redirect my focus and see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as my place of power. So when you're looking at that area, okay, Wallahu fasabrun jameel, Wallahu al-Musta'an, and you're saying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically letting human beings recognize their place of psychology. Place of psychology, you redirect your focus from seeing abuse, whether a trauma in your early childhood or probably pain or whatever you went through, that you would see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically your place of faith, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically the one that you would turn to, and that your actions and your faith, how you would see trauma, how you would see your situation, how you would redirect your vision from looking at the past to looking at the future, from looking at dunya to seeing the akhirah, and you're redirecting your focus on that. That is what is going to determine your psychology and how you relate with the world around you. That's basically that's basically the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was teaching us, the way that a Muslim would relate. Now going back to the same idea, if any harm is basically coming to you, perhaps maybe as a result of something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was, let's call it celestial, let's call it, hey, you got some kind of a disease, who knows why you got cancer, out of all the people, why you got this really strange cancer that the doctor said, hey, we have no cure for that cancer. Okay. And where did it come from? Why did it even exist? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just tells you, فَلَا كَاشِفَ لَهُ إِلَّا هُ. I want you to recognize that no one is capable of uplifting this harm but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, to create what in you? To create in you the honor, the izzah, the pride that you would only connect to your Lord Almighty. You would redirect your focus from seeing that you are nothing but a victim to seeing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that you would look through in order to get through and get over basically all the different pains that you would endure. وَإِيَمْسَسْكَ بِخَيْرٍ فَهُوَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. And if anything that you would basically get, notice that it used the word يَمْسَسْكَ. يَمْسَسْكَ and يَمْسَسْكَ. What is الْمَس? الْمَس is to touch. Just a touch. Okay? In other words, it's not absolute evil that you got, and it's not absolute good that you got. Why? Because absolute good is in Jannah. If you were to, I don't know, have the wealth of Elon Musk, or whether you are to have the power of Mike Tyson, okay, at the end, that's minimal power. That's very small, okay? Or whether you are to have the beauty of X or Y, okay, then that's going to be just a small amount. That's not the ultimate thing. And same thing if you were talking about a doer, we're talking about whether a certain illness or whether we're speaking about pain or whatever it is, or probably poverty, that's still minimal. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not giving you not the absolute good and not the absolute evil yet. That's in the akhirah. You're just getting a slight touch of evil or a slight touch of good. So why did it say فَلَا كَاشِفَ لَهُ إِلَّا هُ when it came to evil, but then فَهُوَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ? Why didn't it say يَمْسَسْكَ اللَّهُ بِضُرٍّ فَهُوَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ and وَيَمْسَسْكَ بِخَيْرٍ فَهُوَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ? Why didn't the ayah say it in that way? When it said وَيَمْسَسْكَ اللَّهُ بِضُرٍّ فَلَا كَاشِفَ لَهُ إِلَّا هُ, that's to redirect your focus whenever a harm would prick you. Anyways, I am recognizing that right now here I'm basically pricked with this evil thing, or at least with this harm. Let's not call it evil, but let's call it harm. And I'm definitely recognizing that I'm not able to stop it. So to say فَهُوَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ within that sentence is basically going to be saying what I already know. But فَلَا كَاشِفَ لَهُ إِلَّا هُ, it's in order to redirect your focus every single time you go through any hardship. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to think of one thing, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is capable of uplifting it. In other words, it's redirecting your focus from recognizing the pain to recognizing that the Lord Almighty is the one that you turn to with that optimism. فَلَا كَاشِفَ لَهُ إِلَّا هُ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to be optimistic and not defined through your pains. So don't be defining yourself through your poverty or through the different things that you're going through. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to wake up, not because you're probably going through maybe a marriage that didn't work out, or probably a relationship that basically was abusive, or probably you lost your job, etc. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not want you to define yourself through your weaknesses. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَلَا كَاشِفَ لَهُ إِلَّا هُ. Define yourself through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Define yourself that you are submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that you recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to be kashif. He's going to be basically removing it. Now the word kashafa, I want you to look at the word. Just give me a second. So what is the word kashif? The word kashafa means expose. Kashafa could also mean to reveal. Okay, so what does that mean? What is the philosophy behind that? If I'm saying that الضر, what does it do? الضر basically comes as something that is overcoming you. Harm. It basically comes with a psychology that you feel that something is putting you in a box, that something is basically surrounding you, that something is coming in and you're just completely tangled. That a door comes in to make you feel that everything is murky and just darkness just surrounds you from every corner. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, فَلَا كَاشِفَ لَهُ, and what you seek is something like an opening, like something that all of a sudden just takes away all this murky cloud that's covering you, and you're not able to see anything. Why? Because when a person is going through anxiety, their ability to use their cognitive skills to think, to get a clear vision of things, to focus, it basically becomes obstructed. That's basically to let us know that a person's ability to think in a situation of anxiety, it basically becomes obstructed and definitely is influenced by whatever they're going through. Anxiety has a direct relationship with a person's ability to process ideas, process vision, process decision making, etc. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَلَا كَاشِفَ لَهُ إِلَّا هُ. That moment when things are not giving you the clarity of vision, the clarity of making clear and good decisions, okay, you just reach out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because He's the one that is kashif. He's the one that's going to basically take away all that murkiness, all that's obstructing your ability to view things. It's basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَلَا كَاشِفَ لَهُ إِلَّا هُ. Turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's the one that's going to take out all this obstruction, all what that is obstructing your ability to view whatever is there. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would be the one to remove it. وَإِن يَمْسَسْكَ بِخَيْرٍ فَهُوَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. And certainly, when we're speaking about فَهُوَ يَمْسَسْكَ بِخَيْرٍ فَهُوَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ, because usually we would think of whatever good that we're going through, we would think of it as it's something that I had contributed in making. If I have a good job, good income, I would think I was so smart. I managed to make this job as basically giving me good income. We would think of it as it was me that had done this. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting you know that actually whatever good that you're going through is basically from the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, don't attribute khair to yourself and evil to Allah. No. Whatever wrong thing or evil thing that's happening, that's basically coming from your صناعة, your kasb, your investment. But the Lord Almighty, you would never attribute evil to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? But the good, know that it's coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether we're speaking about intelligence, beauty, wealth, whatever it is, it's coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so where does that actually come from? Let's say, Ibn Abbas had narrated a hadith. كنت رديف رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. I was behind the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, and then the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم said, يا غلام. The word غلام basically is a child until, well, a little less than puberty. And he said, ألا أعلمك كلمات ينفعك الله بهن. ينفعك الله بهن. Should I not teach you some words that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically give you a benefit from? So Abdullah ibn Abbas, he was sitting behind the Prophet ﷺ on the horse, but the Prophet ﷺ wanted to make use of that timing. And he said, yes, do teach me something. And he said, احفظ الله يحفظك. What is احفظ الله يحفظك? What, memorize the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? No. Meaning, you take in consideration Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's principles, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will preserve you. احفظ الله تجده أمامك. Preserve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's principles, and you would see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically at the forefront, and you would see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically there whenever you need Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's all taking consideration, the principles. تعرف إلى الله في الرخاء يعرفك في الشدة. Know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the time of ease, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will know you and be there for you. That is at the time of hardship. إذا سألت فاسأل الله. If you ask, in other words, you request, you seek something, then ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وإذا استعنت فاستعن بالله. And if you seek refuge in anyone, then make sure you do it through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فقد جف القلم بما هو كائن. For the note, the pen that was basically scribing all the different things that were going to be decreed upon you is basically right there. The pen basically dried out. In other words, there's nothing else to write. Everything is already decreed. فلو أن الخلق كلهم جميعا أرادوا أن ينفعوك بشيء لم يقسمه الله لك لم يقدروا عليه وإن أرادوا أن يضروك بشيء لم يقضيه الله عليك. And if all the people had attempted to give you benefit in something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not decree for you, they would not be capable of doing so. And if they had attempted to harm you in something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not decree for you, they would not have been capable of doing so. وَاعْمَلْ لِلَّهِ بِالشُّكْرِ وَالْيَقِينِ. And do and invest basically for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in what? In being thankful and having certainty. Why is shukr and al-yaqeen? Being thankful, in other words, don't look at the things that you don't have. Look at the potentials that you were given. Redirect your focus from seeing yourself as lacking to seeing yourself as having. Because the ones that will miss out on making any change are the ones that don't recognize their potentials. And the ones that recognize their potentials are the ones that are going to make a change. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you a potential. It's recognizing that potential and recognizing what you would do with it. And then living in certainty is basically recognizing that I will just have to invest using my potentials, and I'm certain that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that can determine success and is the one that basically going to be rewarding me for the intention and for basically the attempt that I will be investing. So it's putting the intention and putting basically the attempt both together. And that's the yaqeen, the certainty that I would have in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَاعْلَمْ أَنَّ فِي الصَّبْرِ مَا تَكْرَهُ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا. And know that patience in what you would detest and what you would hate, there's a lot of good in it. So letting us know that, yes, you might hate to probably do the dishes, clean your room, and probably do all those different tasks, but there's actually a lot good in it. In other words, it's teaching him that enduring pain is what will give you the gain. Enduring the pain is what will give you the gain, whether it's giving you stamina, giving you grit, giving you perseverance, giving you power, but there's no way that you will get the gain and you will get to the end unless you endure a lot of pain. وَأَنَّ النَّصْرَ مَعَ الصَّبْرِ. And that victory comes with endurance and comes with lots of patience and certainly enduring pain. وَأَنَّ الْفَرَجَ مَعَ الْكَرْبِ. And that al-faraj, basically the ending, and we're speaking about an exit away from different pains. مع الكرب. In other words, it comes with it. If you're going through any kind of a calamity, just know that there's no way that calamity comes on its own, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings along with the calamity an opening and a way out. It's just that you would have to figure out that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whenever there's a calamity, don't necessarily think that this is eternal. Don't necessarily think that that's the end of it, but know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for every single calamity, there's always an exit that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring. وَأَنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا. With every single hardship comes an ease. Comes an ease. Al-usr is basically coming with an al, it's specific, but yusr is basically not coming with an al, meaning it is not specific, and it may bring many different kinds of eases, but you would only need to endure one hardship, but eases come in many ways. Okay, so just recognizing this one, and basically the ayah that we are working on, من يصرف عنه يومئذ فقد رحمه وذلك الفوز المبين وإن يمسسك الله بضر فلا كاشف له إلا هو وإن يمسسك بخير فهو على كل شيء قدير. So up until here, it's basically what we had done. Tafseer al-Qurtubi. Inshallah, tomorrow we'll continue وهو القاهر فوق عباده with Tafseer al-Qurtubi. Okay, inshallah. Any questions before we end for our tafsir for today and go for Hisn al-Muslim for just half an hour, inshallah? Any questions in regards to what we were saying? You can unmute yourself if you would like, or you can write it in the chat as well. And if no one's not wanting to be recorded, that's also okay.